You're there.
All right. Okay, so we're now going to move from the first 9 chapters, which give a nice introduction to Proverbs generally and wisdom. And then we're going to move into that part of Proverbs, which most of you are going to be most familiar with, all those single, little Proverbs, one after the next, after the next, after the next, after the next. So what I wanted to do this morning, we will get into some of the Proverbs in chapter 10, but I wanted to ask some, or address some general questions about how you approach Proverbs. And so, as I mentioned last week, you can't just read them through and expect that whatever you see at first blush, that's it, I got it, and then we move on to the next proverb, and I got that one, and move on to the next proverb, I got that one. The Proverbs are something that you want to stop and sort of turn over and look at different angles and different aspects and ponder different ways in which this thing could be true or not true, or different meanings of the words in different senses, and recognize that Proverbs are not meant to be exact. They are meant to tantalize the mind to get you to think about how it's true and how it's not true and how it's important. So I'll talk about different things that we want to look at, some different questions that we want to ask regarding Proverbs. So, for example, I'm going to draw a distinction between what I call the dimension that we're working with. We talked about this last week. Are we talking about, is it really talking about the vertical dimension of things? Is it talking about God's role in things? Okay? Now note that there's a difference between how Psalms and Proverbs deal with God. With Psalms, God is very personal. Most of the Psalms are prayers addressed to God, or they are wrestling with what God is doing or what we want God to do or what we can't believe that God allowed or things like this. It's very personal. In Proverbs, when it talks about God, it's really talking more about God's place or role in how things work. Okay, it's more third person, okay? And so we'll consider that. Is the proverb talking about how we need to take God into consideration when we evaluate what's going on in our lives or what we ought to do or not do? There's the horizontal dimension, and that is, what does this tell us about how we relate to one another in the good and the bad and all of that? And the third dimension is, what does this tell us about our own hearts or our neighbor's hearts, for that matter? What does it tell us about the inner human being? Because that's where an awful lot of the challenges are. By the way, we're going to be, in the sermon today, we're going to be taking a good hard look at James chapter 4, which is an examination of the turmoil, which is the human heart, okay? Which is where the mischief comes from, folks. So I call that the dimension, and then I talk about the domain. So what area of wisdom is this proverb talking about, okay? Is it talking about wisdom generally? Many of the Proverbs talk about wisdom generally. So we might say, well, if the 10 words of the 10 things of the 10 commandments are a summary of wisdom generally, then you might say it's talking about the whole thing. But then you might look at the different Proverbs and say, yeah, but this one is zeroed in. This is really more talking about the nature of life or the inner life, or it's talking about domestic life or material support, things like that. So you might want to consider, what is this proverb teaching us or telling us or assuming about our duties to one another, our duties to God, and the nature of the world in which we live, okay? Because Proverbs is an exploration of the Judeo-Christian worldview. It's explaining the way things are. It's sort of like Religion 101. Before we get to the higher, deeper questions of what is God doing in sending His Son and the atonement and the resurrection and the ascension, let's just talk about the basics of life. And by the way, that's where most of the arguments with our culture are. Most of the arguments with our culture are not the fine points of what God is doing in Christ. Most of the arguments with our culture is, what is the nature of reality? What's a human being? What's our duty to one another? What's our duty to God? And all that kind of stuff. we don't even get to Christ, what he's all about. All right, so that's one series of questions you want to just look at. Where's this thing talking about? And then we want to consider, number one, most Proverbs are going to contain at least 2 lines. Okay? Usually will it be a pair, and you need to read the pair together. Now, it's helpful to read each one separately, too, to think, what does this say by itself? And then to say, okay, well, how does the second line add or explain or help us to understand the first line better? Because a lot of times the first line could mean a lot of different things. The second line will tell you what the proverb is really focused on, okay? But then sometimes a proverb needs to be read with the proverb that comes next for a similar reason. It's developing a theme. Or sometimes a proverb needs to be read with another proverb that's 3 or 4 or 5 verses down that's touching upon similar kinds of ideas. So you want to look at the context, and Proverbs is not like a book where there's some kind of a plot going on. There's nothing like that. It's not a logical argumentation. But you do want to look and see, because sometimes it's going to be really clear that certain proverbs are paired. Or you'll have 3 or 4 that will all be dealing with and developing a certain idea or theme. And they'll be saying different things or related things. Sometimes it might be just accidental. These 2 proverbs are both talking about a similar thing, and they just happen to be in the same chapter. But when they were compiled, nobody ever thought, let's put these together. It's got to go somewhere. It's got to go here, okay? But it's still helpful to realize that there are different ways of approaching a particular thing. So when we're reading Proverbs, you want to pay attention to what's before and what's after. That can be helpful, for example, when I say, you don't just read a proverb and then move on to the next one. But you also miss something if you just read one proverb all by itself and ignore what comes after or what came before. So sometimes what you have to do is read a chapter, let's say, just kind of go through it generally, and then start focusing on them individually. Then your mind will remember, aha, there was another proverb down here. We'll take a look at how this works. Okay. One thing that you have to ask yourself is the meaning of this literal or metaphorical or both? Because oftentimes the proverb itself will be talking about something like treasures, okay? And you could think, well, treasure, I mean, literally, maybe it's money or something like that. It's talking about riches or money. And so literally that's what it's talking about. But then you might think, but there's all kinds of different kinds of treasures. And so maybe this proverb means more than just money or riches. And then you want to expand the thought. Does it apply also if what we're talking about is spiritual riches, for example? Does it work the same way then? Then you may hit upon the fact that actually this works better with spiritual riches than it does with the actual riches. And you may say, I don't think this thing is about literal riches at all. Or then you say, well, maybe it's about both of them, but it applies in different ways. So you think about that. And you might think about something, again, on the topic of riches. What are riches? I mean, doesn't that depend on who we're talking about? Because one man's trash is another man's treasure. So, I mean, you know, we have to ask ourselves, well, what kind of treasures are we talking about? Okay, so is it literal? Is it metaphorical? Is it both? Is the proverb in the nature of a command or a prohibition? Is it a warning? Is it a promise? Is it just an observation? We'll find proverbs that don't seem to be telling us anything other than you might want to consider this, okay? This is an aspect of life in this world. And it's not telling you beware. It's not telling you better not do this. It's just saying it's the way it is, okay? Think about this. And think about what that has to say about the world in which we live. We might want to ask what is being asserted in the proverb, because the proverb is saying something. And then, so one thing we might say is, well, is the thing being asserted always true? Okay? So So it's reminding us of some truth that we don't want ever to forget. And it's always true. And it might be that it's always true, and we know that it's always true because experience tells us that it's always true. So for example, if a proverb were to say, yeah, rich and poor alike die. Okay, how do we know that rich and poor alike die? Experience tells us that the rich and the poor alike die. Okay? So, everybody knows this. And so you'd say, well, why would a proverb bother to tell you that? Well, there are implications to that which sometimes we forget. So it tells you a truth, which is, we all know that it's true, but we may forget to think, okay, well, since that's true, maybe that has some relevance to my life. Now, there will also be things truths, axiomatic truths, that are to be accepted by faith. There are a lot of these in Proverbs, and they are important. Probably among the most important things that are there. These are things which are true because God says they're true. They're things that you better not forget, because if you forget them, you will be reminded one day. So there are lots and lots and lots of proverbs that talk about how God is against the wicked, and the meek shall inherit the earth, okay? All right, well, those are not things that we know by experience. By experience, you can't always tell whether God is against this person, or if he is, what he's doing about that, or that the righteous are necessarily going to flourish. It doesn't always work out that way, and yet there are lots and lots of proverbs that are telling you bluntly, point blank, and it's meant to be taken literally, that this is the case. God is against the wicked. Therefore, when you see the wicked flourish, what are you to remember? God is against the wicked. So if a wicked person flourishes, are they really getting ahead? Okay? If God is for us, who can be against us? If God is against you, what difference does it make how well you do otherwise? So there are a lot of these, and they are important for us to remember, because everybody knows, it doesn't matter what your belief in God or any reality, everybody knows that everybody dies, rich and poor alike. Not everybody knows who God is for and who God is against. If you're just going to measure based upon how much stuff somebody has at the end of their life, then that's one way of measuring it. And Proverbs are going to tell us over and over again, you may measure that way, but you will be wrong. Okay? So, there are proverbs that are just always true, and sometimes we're going to know they're always true, okay? And by experience, and others, the really important ones, I'm telling you this is true, okay? And then there are proverbs that are usually true. It's the rule, but there are exceptions, and sometimes the exceptions prove the rule. The crime doesn't pay, we would say, it's probably usually true, but there's exceptions. There's notable exceptions, but the fact that they are exceptional tells you that there is a rule that says ordinarily crime may pay briefly, but in the long term, your liability insurance to be a criminal is way too high. I mean, sooner or later, you're going to pay the piper, and we know this from experience, but we also know from experience it isn't always so. So there'll be many proverbs that are going to tell us things like that, things like crime doesn't pay, and it's giving us an observation about the way the world is, all right, and the way the world normally is, but we're going to recognize, yeah, but it isn't always that way. But that doesn't mean the proverb is wrong. It's not like Solomon was ignorant of the fact that bad people sometimes get away with it. It's a proverb, it's sometimes true, and it's important to remember that. So there's a number of proverbs that will speak about the difference between what a person says and what's actually in their heart. Now, that doesn't mean that people, whenever they speak, are lying. But it's warning us about this truth. Just because a person says a thing doesn't mean it's true. Just because a person is your dear friend and says a thing doesn't mean it's true. Just because you say something to yourself doesn't mean it's true, okay? So, and we need to be aware of the fact that what's really going on in our heart is deep waters, okay? And those deep waters sometimes conceal what the truth is, and that's something that we all need to be aware of. And you'll find statements now and again that you'd say, well, that's, almost never or never true, but it ought to be. So it's telling us the way things should be rather than the way things are. These are all helpful things, questions, and others like it, to ask yourself when you are looking at a proverb like a Rubik's Cube and you're turning it this way and that to see which ways fit, which ways seem to be working, which ways really speak to the way life is, in which ways would be, that's kind of a ham-handed way of interpreting that, and that's probably not what it means. There's wisdom here. And what's remarkable is these are very old. I mean, these Proverbs, most of them were old when Solomon compiled them, okay? So we're not talking about fresh new things, and yet it's stunning and amazing how little things have changed, how much of this, yeah, that's exactly the way people are still people. It's been 3,000 years since Solomon would have put these things down. And like I said, many of these proverbs were already ancient proverbs by the time Solomon got hold of them, so who knows how far back they go. And they are clearly describing human behavior. They are clearly describing the same world in which we inhabit today. Think about how important that is, that there is wisdom that has not changed and does not change, and how little our technological society has changed any of these fundamental truths. Okay, any thoughts on how you approach these proverbs generally? You just don't read it and say, well, look at the notes and then that's it. You ask questions about it, yeah.
I found if you got the deal where you're trying to go through the Bible in a year, you might as well skip Proverbs, because if you're reading it like a book, it doesn't make any sense. Something every now and then will catch you, and if you stop and start trying to figure out what that is, and I haven't ever seen any of this stuff. I mean, I haven't been exposed to how you study Proverbs. You start trying to figure out what one verse means. I ain't never getting through the Bible in a year if I'm going to do this. So
well,
start skimming.
Yeah, so no, that's true. And understand that different parts of the Bible require different treatment. So the historical parts of the Bible, reading through that once a year can be really, really helpful, because it reminds you of the broad story and the big characters and so forth. Then you'll pick things up each time you read it that you missed last time, and you'll see, and you'll make connections and so on. And that is really more than sufficient to understand, what's being communicated. There are other parts of the Bible that once a year won't do it. So, for example, Psalms are to be read over and over and over and over again. And Proverbs are similar. I go through all of Psalms and all of Proverbs every month. Now, that's a significant burden, okay, because that's a lot of material, and you skip a day, and that's twice as much, and you skip 2 days, and now you're really overwhelmed. But the thing is, I wouldn't want to read 1 Kings every month. That's not going to add that much to my store of knowledge. But to read Psalms every month means I am hitting the same Psalms over and over again, but every time I'm hitting them, I'm seeing new things in it and understanding in a very personal way. And it's the same with Proverbs. Every time I get to this proverb, I'm looking at it from a slightly different angle and seeing different things in it. So different parts of your Bible are to be read differently, and Psalms and Proverbs are not something that you just read through, and now I've done it. They're just not designed that way. They are very, very dense, and they oftentimes require a lot of specialized understanding of, particularly in Psalms, what it's talking about so that you can appreciate it more deeply. If you just read it through quickly, you're getting the words, but you're not understanding what it's really talking about. So maybe that will help you. I agree with you. If you're going to try to read through Psalms as part of through the Bible or Proverb, you're skimming it. I mean, and you can skip it or you can read it, but if you read it, you might as well have skipped it. You're just getting just certain high points. Is the proverb being ironic or sarcastic or humorous? There's a lot of proverbs that are that way. And you need to understand that's the attitude here. It is actually meaning the opposite of what it seems to be saying. And or others are, I mean, it's kind of there's a lot of the proverbs that deal with fools are very sarcastic. You know, the slothful, you know, the sluggards, they just take it on the chin over and over again in Proverbs, and a lot of times it's comical, the images that are given, and it's sarcastic. If this is what you do, this is what you can expect. And why, you know, there's a couple of portraits of drunks, for example, that, you know, humorous and very sarcastic. Okay, that this is what people do. This is how people behave. You know, I stabbed myself and it didn't hurt. Well, why not? Okay, well, all right. So that's also important to recognize. And then you also want to just, once you've kind of looked at it this way and that, think about ways in your practical life, things that you've experienced where this proverb would apply. And it doesn't have to apply perfectly. It just that the principle here you find is true, or I would find it true here, or it speaks to this situation or that situation. That's very helpful, okay, where you're going to say, you're not really saying, what does this mean to me? What you are saying is, where have I seen this? And where do I see this? How do I see this played out now, as well as then? Okay? With that, let's just take a look at some Proverbs, and we'll enjoy thinking about what they're saying. And some of these will be fairly straightforward, and then some of them are a little bit more mystical, I guess. Treasures gained by wickedness do not profit. That's the first line. We've talked about this. It's contrasting treasures gained by wickedness and righteousness. Okay, so and then there's two proverbs here. The second one is, the Lord does not let the righteous go hungry, but he thwarts the craving of the wicked. So you have a couple of pairings of wickedness and righteousness. Okay? And in the first place, wickedness and righteousness are contrasted. Wickedness has treasures. And so you say, okay, it doesn't profit. It doesn't say why. The second line introduces something that might tell you why, at least one reason why.
Helps define profit as well.
Right. And so that's right. What do you mean by profit? What do you mean by treasures? Okay. Well, one thing we know is death is going to wipe it all out. So the first line alone doesn't tell you that. It just says treasures gained by wickedness doesn't profit. And that could be applied in lots of different ways. But then the second line is saying, if nothing else, okay, you can look at it this way, if nothing else, when you die, whatever your treasures are, just went away. Okay, so consider that. Now, of course, what if a person says, well, there is no life after death, and there's no God, and we all have to die. So what would this mean to them? Nothing. Okay? If you don't believe that there's a God behind all of this or life after death, then your conclusion is going to be, well, we all die, and we all lose everything when we die, so I'd rather be somebody who has plenty when I die rather than somebody who has nothing when I die, since we all end up dying. And so if you look at it that way, okay. Now, of course, we know that that would not be a proper way to look at any proverb, because Proverbs never, never, never take an atheistic view like that. Now, always the assumption is, okay, righteousness delivers from death. Okay, now that is an interesting question, because how does an atheist deal with that? The atheist would just have to say, well, there is no righteousness. Nothing delivers from death.
Well, like, when I look at this, this Proverbs, it kind of takes me straight to my battle with custody of my daughter. And treasures gained by wickedness do not profit. You know, how he kept trying to talk bad about me and do all this wickedness and turn my daughter against me.
Yeah, and so you can ask...
But the righteousness delivers from death. Now, all of a sudden, she sees her dad for who he is.
Well, that would be, that would be, yeah.
And now he kind of lost her. You know, it's like, it's kind of like that's how I'm seeing this contrast. You know, because like the wickedness, they lose it.
Well,
I mean, that's how I see this.
well, sure, no, I understand. Wickedness wants things. Righteousness wants things, okay? The things that wickedness gets are illusory. Death will wipe it out. The question is, what is this righteousness that it's talking about? And how does righteousness survive death? Now, it is not being theological here. So we could say, okay, well, we know what righteousness is. Righteousness is the righteousness of Christ applied to us by faith. Okay, well, that's fine, but it's not being that detailed about it. It's just saying that there is a status of being right with God. And however that happens, it's not describing how that happens, but however that is right, you are in a right relationship with God. That's righteousness. That survives death. But whoever would try to achieve what they want, apart from righteousness, it doesn't profit. But there's no doubt that people are going to try to do that. The Lord does not let the righteous go hungry. So we're back to the righteous again. Wicked, righteous, righteous, wicked. If you look at those 4 lines. Now the 3rd line says, the Lord does not let the righteous go hungry. Well, and there again, we can say, does that mean that if you're right with God, that you'll never be hungry? We know it can't mean that. We might say, as a general rule, the righteous people, God takes care of them. He does give us our daily bread. That's true. If we're talking about food and our material needs here in this world, it's a general rule. But there are many exceptions to that. And in the end, even the righteous will die. So there comes a time when even the righteous have to admit the Lord is not going to give me my daily bread today because I'm not going to live. But so it can't mean that, but there is something about hunger and satisfaction and what we really need that the Lord will not allow us to be deprived of. The righteous, those who are right with God, however that happens. On the other hand, the wicked have a craving, and that craving is thwarted. Who thwarts the craving?
Themselves by seeking incorrectly.
Yes, but it says, but he thwarts. Who's he? God will do it. This is a very vital thing to recognize about the biblical worldview, and that is, God will straighten accounts. He is personally involved in this. So it may be that the wicked are hurting themselves by choosing things that will dissolve. So if you choose something that will dissolve and that becomes your treasure, you're being foolish, and then you are going to you are going to reap the rewards of having chosen something that doesn't last. And so because you've done that, you've invested in this, and you've invested poorly, and now you're going to pay the price by sort of the nature of what it is that you've chosen. But this is going further than that. This is saying, and God will make sure of it. Even if you chose something that was good, can a wicked person choose something that's good? Yes. Yeah. But though you crave it, he will not let you have it. God will see to it that you don't get it. This is very personal. The righteous will survive death, okay? The righteous are not going to be deprived of whatever they need. Not necessarily what you think you need, but whatever you need. On the other hand, what the wicked want, whether it's good or bad, they won't get. Because it's not because wicked people always choose bad things. It's because wicked people have made an enemy of God, and God will see to it that you fail, even if you make all the right moves. You see what I'm saying? If the wicked person should do everything right, but they're wicked, God will thwart their craving. It's very personal. This is not just a matter of, look, I'm going to help you understand the difference between investing in gold that lasts or investing in paper money that can evaporate if the government prints too much of it, okay? So you have lots of commercials on that. You want to invest in gold, it's solid and it lasts and all of this kind of stuff. But there's an angle here that's saying behind all of this is a power that is going to make sure the wicked lose and the righteous win, okay? Even if they choose the same things. All right, let's think about this, another pair. These are similar. When the tempest passes, the wicked is no more, but the righteous is established forever. This similar idea. We have a contrast between the wicked and the righteous. What's the tempest it's talking about? I mean, the tempest could be death. Tempest could be life. Okay? When death passes, the wicked are no more. When life passes, the wicked are no more. But it could also be a temporary thing. I mean, there are all kinds of sort of penultimate disasters in life, and oftentimes so when we talk about when death passes over, the wicked are no more, is that an axiomatic truth? Yes. How do we know? Well, they are no more, yeah, but then you don't know. I mean, if there's a God, maybe the wicked are okay. Maybe the wicked and the righteous end up in the same spot, and God watches over them all. No, what this is saying is, when it's all over, the wicked is no more, God will see to it. This is a truth to be received by faith, that is, it is always true. So if it looks like a wicked person has thrived, if it looks like a wicked person has cheated even God, don't worry, okay? They have not. The righteous will be established forever. Well, when the tornado comes through, do righteous people not die? They do. Yet we are being told once again, they will be established forever. So when you see the righteous dying, understand that it means something entirely different when a righteous person dies and when a wicked person dies. And this is to be received by faith. God is telling us this, therefore it's true, no matter what it is that you perceive in your world.
Is tempest temptation?
No, tempest means a storm. When the tempest passes, it's a storm. And so you can think of the storm as, look, all of our lives are going to end up in a series of illnesses and finally death. Okay, so you can look at it that way, or you could say life itself is a storm. And one thing after the next. And when it's all done, the righteous will be established forever. Jesus says, the man who builds his house on sand, right, is a fool, because the storm will come, the wind and the waves, and to blow the whole thing down. But the wise person, the person of the kingdom, builds his house on solid rock. It's the same idea as you have here. The righteous will never be removed. That's verse 30. But the wicked will not dwell in the land. Same idea. They are axiomatic truths that we are to remember. We teach our children this. You have to teach your children this. But then we have to keep teaching ourselves this as well. There are winners and losers in life, and they are not what we are being told by the world. There are winners and losers, and the scripture is clear who is who. Don't forget that. Okay? But here's another example, though. We're looking at two different proverbs separated by a few verses, but they're speaking to one another. Note that. What is the significance of dwelling in the land?
Promised land.
Dwelling in the land in the Hebrew scripture is speaking about dwelling in the land that God promised to his people. And that is not just a piece of real estate, but it is a life with God. So God dwells in the land. You are to dwell with me. That was the whole point. I'm going to take you out of Egypt. I'm going to enter into a covenant with you. I'm going to give you this land. I will dwell in the land. You will dwell in the land with me. And we will all live happily ever after. Okay? But if you're wicked, you will not dwell in the land. And if you are all wicked, the land will eject you, which is exactly what the history of the Old Testament says. That's what the exile was all about. You're chased after other gods. The land has vomited you out. But God is merciful, so the people returned. Okay? But the land is where we live with God. So it's not just a place with a picket fence and a nice piece of property and a mailbox. It's living with God. Okay.
It has a new meaning within the New Testament.
It does, but thank you. Actually, I have one, and I just didn't bother to get it out of my pocket because why? I'm so excited about life in the land. Well, but in the New Testament, it's the same underlying idea, and that is living with God. We live with God now, but the promise is that there is a land where we will live with him in a much more tangible and full way. But the point of biblical religion, whether Old or New Testament, is living with God. That's either isolated from God or you're living with him. The purpose of the covenant is so that we may live with him. The purpose of the Old Covenant and the purpose of the New Covenant, the purpose of the land in the Old Covenant, the purpose of when Jesus says the meek shall inherit the earth, he's just basically saying that what was the land of Canaan is now, all of creation is going to be for those who live with God. Okay, so there are those who are going to survive to the world to come, and there are those who aren't. These are truths that if you forget, will warp everything about your life. And if you remember, will help you keep it together. Remember the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. The rich man and Lazarus, Jesus tells this parable to exaggerate the differences between the rich man who was indifferent and lived only for himself and couldn't care about anybody. He was rich and had everything he could possibly want. And then poor Lazarus, who's like the poorest of the poor. But this man is to be understood as righteous, and the point is, in this life, the rich man got his good stuff, and Lazarus got nothing. But now see how it's all reversed. Because Lazarus, though he had nothing, was established forever, and the rich man, though he had everything, did not remain in the land. Okay? What the wicked dreads will come upon him. Think about that. What do wicked people dread? don't they dread the same kind of stuff that the righteous might dread? Certainly death, catastrophe, grief, loss. If you have a pile of money, what do you dread? Losing it. If you have a beautiful home, what do you dread? So we all dread that. The wicked dreads that. The wicked dreads that so much, what does he do? He's wicked, and he will act wickedly in order to keep it. Because he dreads losing it. But what is the promise here? You're going to lose it. You can turn to wickedness if you like. It won't help. God personally will see to it that what you dread, what you are sinning in order to prevent, is going to overwhelm you. But the desire of the righteous will be granted. Now, got to read this properly. That doesn't mean that anything that a righteous person desires will be granted. It's contrasting what the wicked dreads and what the righteous desire. The desire is a nice thought here. It's assuming that the righteous desire what? Righteousness. They want whatever goes along with that. And we are sure they'll get it. They will get it. It may not be exactly what they're imagining, but when they get there, they'll realize that what they really wanted, what they really desired, they really will get. And the things that the wicked are really willing to lie, cheat, and steal in order to keep, they are going to lose. Another axiomatic truth. The hope of the righteous brings joy. What does that mean? What's the hope of the righteous? The hope is not the feeling in their heart. The hope is what they're expecting to gain. Okay? The righteous expect to live with God. And that gives them joy. Even in the midst of a life which is disintegrating, I still have a hope. So for we Christians, I mean, if our life is going to pieces or our health is going to pieces, we still have a promise from God and a future hope. And that's not being taken away from us. It's our treasure in heaven, where rust does not consume and thief does not break in and steal. Jesus is all over Proverbs, by the way. So much of his teaching is drawn right from these truths. And by the way, these truths are nothing more than applications of the law of Moses. Okay? So, that brings you joy. In the worst of your days, you can at least know that in the end, you will wear the crown of righteousness and stand with the angels in the glory of the world to come. You know that that's going to be the case, and that will give you joy because you know that will not be taken away from you. But the expectation of the wicked, similar to what they dread, this is the opposite of what they dread. This is what they hope to get. Okay? It will perish. What they want will perish. What they dread will happen. Axiomatic truths. An unbeliever would stand here and say, I don't think that that's true. Because they don't see the evidence of it in their experience. And we say, okay, that's fine. You're wrong. This is not written to an unbeliever. This is written to believers, and it's reminding of what we need to know. God is over all things, and he will make sure that this is true. Don't forget it as you make your life decisions, or as if you try to evaluate your life and say, is my life worth anything or not? Okay? Don't forget that the righteous will be established forever. Don't forget that if you try to achieve your happiness in this world, what you dread will come upon you, and what you hope to get, you will not get. The blessing of the Lord makes rich, and he adds no sorrow with it. Part of the problem with wicked is the price you have to pay in order to get what you want. And there's a lot of stories, and think about. I'm reminded now, as it just comes to mind, like the old classic movie, The Godfather, and the descent of Michael Corleone. He wants to stay out of the business because he wants to live a normal, decent life, and so he just doesn't want to have anything to do with any of that. But things draw him in, and one thing leads to the next, until finally you can't get out. So yeah, you got a lot of good things, but you're paying a very heavy price for it. But this says that the blessing of the Lord will make rich, and he doesn't, there's no strings attached. It's not a monkey paws kind of a thing. Okay, you can have your $1 million, and then see what happens tomorrow. Okay, take your chances. It's not like that. When God blesses, he blesses without, there's no trap here. It's real. One of the things that people who will engage in wickedness in order to get rich is they either have a bad conscience or a completely seared conscience. Okay? You're plagued with the one, and you're really doomed with the other. But God allows you to have your riches. Now, we can ask the question here, what is riches? The blessing of the Lord makes rich. Is the blessing the riches? Might the blessing include monetary riches? So if God grants you riches, money riches, it's his blessing. It's not your corruption, it's his blessing. Then you may take it, accept it, and he's not going to add any sorrow to it. Use it properly, but there's no trick here. But, although this isn't talking about Satan, but if Satan gives you your riches, then there's a string attached, okay? Think of Faust, and his deal with the devil. Mephistopheles makes him a deal. I'll make you rich, I'll make you wealthy, I'll give you everything you want, you'll have a very happy life. But at the end of your life, you're mine. Which was great. He made that deal until it got close to the end of his life, and then he realized that was not a good deal. Okay? The Lord doesn't do that. He blesses, and there's no subtext, there's no fine print here. He has no sorrow with it. Once again, it might be that the blessing itself is the riches. It might be that you're still dirt poor. But you're one of the righteous. You're one of the righteous because you belong to God, and that was a gift given to you by him. And therefore you will remain and be established forever. A rich man's wealth is a strong city. The poverty of the poor is their ruin. What does this say? It's kind of an observation. A rich man's wealth is a strong city. He relies on his wealth to take care of his life. Gives him confidence. Gives him assurance, security. It's a strong city. Is it really a strong city? It's an illusion, isn't it? This actually is an example of what I'm talking about, an ironic. This is ironic. He thinks his wealth is his strong city, when in fact the wealth will evaporate in a heartbeat. It won't protect him at all. It's an illusion to him, and so he trusts in it. But look at the second line. What does that mean? The poverty of the poor is their ruin. Is that true? Or is that also ironic? There are a lot of rich people who think that their security is in their wealth. Are there not a lot of poor people who think that because they're poor, they're ruined? Is that true? It's not. It's not. So a poor person can be just as wrong in their evaluation of their actual riches as a rich person can be, in opposite ways, but just as wrong. One thinks their riches is their be-all and end-all, and the other thing that the lack of riches is the ruination, when in truth, your riches or your poverty mean nothing in terms of what really is going on. So this proverb is asking us to consider that. How do all rich people put their confidence in their wealth? No. Do all poor people consider themselves ruined because they're poor? No. So it's making an observation that is often true, not always true, but it's often true. Often true that rich people think that their riches is their winning ticket, and the poor think that their poverty is, the giant cosmic unfairness to them. They're missing out on all of life, and that's because they have no money. When words are many, transgression is not lacking. Is that always true? It's often true. Is this a statement that God is giving us to be taken by faith, or is it something where Solomon is giving us an observation about life that we probably have all experienced? If you talk too much, you're liable to get yourself in trouble. Because you spill out too much, or because, the more you talk, the more opportunities there are to make mistakes, say the wrong thing, offend somebody, or do something. Now, the next line, though, is talking about the opposite of talking too much, and that's restraining your lips, okay? Not everything that you feel like saying should be said.
Is this true for a sermon, too?
It should, that's right. It's good for everything. That prudence means some things are best left unsaid or not said now. Some things need to be thought about first, and then we say them later. Some things are best never said at all because they weren't true, or maybe they were true, but they weren't helpful. But there are people who just can't shut up. Whatever is in their little old heart comes bubbling out. And we know that by experience, there's trouble there. Okay? And so this is a proverb that is warning us. It is giving us the value of prudence. Think about what you say. Words are powerful. That is something that is going to come up a lot in Proverbs. The mouth, the lips, words, what we say. And that we should be careful with what we say. Fools babble, but the prudent restrain their lips. Okay, let's pray. Lord Jesus, we thank you for this wisdom, Lord, especially for those truths which we need to be reminded over and over again, that you yourself will vouchsafe the life and the future hope of those who trust in you. And that, Lord, those who do not trust in you will not get what their hearts desire, will not get what they crave, will not get what they are willing to sin to achieve and to hold on to. Help us to know this, O Lord, so that we may order our days aright and so that we may properly understand the true riches that we have, the true riches that are waiting for us in you. Amen.